The high plains wind carries more than just dust and the scent of sagebrush. It carries whispers of forgotten massacres of fortunes won and lost, and of spirits that linger in the canyons. Tonight it carries the scent of blood to the doorstep of a lone woman's cabin. A woman who has walled off her heart as surely as she has barricaded her door. But when she finds a man left for dead in the dirt, she doesn't know she's about to shelter a secret that will either be her salvation or her undoing, a secret that leads a warrior clan. The dust-choked wind whispered secrets across the unforgiving plains, a desolate lullaby for the damned. It carried the scent of sun-baked earth and distant rain, a promise of life in a land that so often dealt in death. And on this particular evening, as the sun bled its fiery demise across the horizon, it carried the scent of something else, blood. A lone woman, weathered as the ancient gnarled cottonwood she called her neighbor, stood on the porch of her isolated cabin. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sky, scanned the vast, empty expanse. She wasn't looking for trouble. In this part of the world, trouble had a nasty habit of finding you all on its own. The first hint of crimson wasn't in the sky, but on the parched ground, just beyond her meager corn patch. It was a stark, unnatural stain against the ochre earth. Her hand, calloused and steady, instinctively went to the Colt peacemaker holstered at her hip, a silent companion in her solitary existence. A raven's cry, sharp and mocking, drew her gaze. And there, half hidden in the long shadows of dusk, was the source. A man, or what was left of one. He was a heap of torn flesh and bloody buckskin, left for the buzzards and the coyotes. The bandits, she reckoned, had been thorough. His face was a swollen, unrecognizable mask of bruises and cuts. A dark, wet patch on his chest spoke of a wound that should have already claimed him. Yet as she cautiously approached, the softest of moans, a mere wisp of sound escaped his cracked lips. He was alive. Against all odds, against all reason, he was alive. Her name was Maeve, and the last thing she needed was a dying man on her doorstep. Solitude was her shield, her fortress against a world that had taken everything from her. Every soul that crossed her path was a potential threat, a harbinger of the chaos she had fought so hard to escape. Her instincts screamed at her to turn back, to let nature take its course. It was the law of the West, the cruel, unwritten code of survival. But as she looked at the man, a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long, long time stirred within her. It wasn't pity, not exactly. It was a stubborn refusal to let the darkness of this land claim another soul without a fight. With a grunt of exertion that belied her slender frame, she hauled him into her cabin. The man was heavy, a dead weight of muscle and bone. The scent of stale whiskey and blood filled her small one-room sanctuary, a stark violation of the quiet order she had meticulously maintained. She laid him on her own cot, the only soft place in the entire dwelling, and got to work. For 3 days and 3 nights, she was his keeper. She cleaned his wounds with whiskey and boiled water. Her touch surprisingly gentle for a woman who had forgotten the meaning of the word. She stitched his flesh with a needle and thread meant for mending clothes. Her brow furrowed in concentration. She forced broth and water between his swollen lips, willing him to live with a fierce intensity that surprised even herself. During his fevered delirium, he spoke. Not in English, but in a language she had never heard before, a cascade of guttural sounds and flowing syllables that sounded both ancient and powerful. He spoke of shadows and eagles, of a sacred mountain and a blood oath. He called out names. Kaelin Lyra Ronan. His voice filled with a mixture of command and anguish. He was no ordinary drifter, no simple prospector who had run afoul of outlaws. The way he carried himself, even in his unconscious state, spoke of a different kind of authority, a different kind of strength. On the fourth day, his fever broke. His eyes, the color of molten gold, fluttered open. They were the eyes of a predator, sharp and assessing, yet laced with a confusion that softened their intensity. He stared at the log ceiling of her cabin, at the unfamiliar surroundings, and then at her. "Where?" He rasped, his voice a dry, scratchy whisper. "You're safe," Maeve said, her tone flat, betraying none of the turmoil that had raged within her for the past few days. "For now." He tried to sit up, a groan of pain escaping his lips as his muscles protested. Maeve pushed him gently back down. "Don't be a fool," she said. "You've got a hole in you that a man could stick his fist through. You're lucky to be breathing." He looked at her, then truly looked at her, and a flicker of something unreadable passed through his golden eyes. "Who are you?" "The woman who saved your life," she replied. Her voice clipped. "That's all you need to know." She turned away, busying herself at the hearth, creating a distance between them. But she could feel his eyes on her, a silent, penetrating gaze that seemed to see right through the walls she had so carefully constructed around her heart. As the days turned into a week, he began to heal. He told her his name was Ronan, and that he had been ambushed by a band of outlaws, led by a man known only as Silas. They had been after something he carried, something he refused to speak of. He was tight-lipped about his past, offering only vague answers to her guarded questions. But the more he spoke, the more Maeve realized that the man she had saved was a walking contradiction. He knew how to track, how to hunt, how to read the land with an intimacy that rivaled her own. Yet there was an air of refinement about him, a certain grace in his movements that spoke of a life far removed from the harsh realities of the frontier. One evening, as a storm raged outside, mirroring the unspoken tension within the small cabin, he finally revealed a piece of his secret. "The language I spoke," he said, his voice low and steady. "It is the tongue of my people, the Cheyenne." Maeve turned to him, her eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and dawning understanding. She knew of the Cheyenne, of course. They were a proud and powerful tribe, known for their warrior prowess and their fierce independence. But Ronan didn't look like any Cheyenne she had ever seen. His features were sharper, his skin a shade lighter, his golden eyes a startling anomaly. He seemed to read her thoughts. "My mother was Cheyenne," he explained. "My father was not. I walk in two worlds belonging to neither." But it was what he said next that sent a chill down Maeve's spine, a premonition of the storm that was about to break, not just outside her cabin, but over her entire life. "I am not just a man of the Cheyenne," he said, his golden eyes locking with hers. "I am the leader of a warrior clan, the clan of the Shadow Wolf, and the men who left me for dead. They did not just steal from me. They stole a sacred artifact, a symbol of my clan's power, and they will stop at nothing to ensure it remains in their possession." Suddenly, the isolation that had once been Maeve's sanctuary felt like a trap. The trouble she had so desperately tried to avoid had not just found her. She had invited it in, nursed it back to health, and was now staring it in the face. The bandits would be back. Not for him, because they thought him dead. They would be back for the one thing they had overlooked in their haste a witness. and that witness was her. The wind that howled outside Maeve's cabin was a restless spirit, carrying tales of the untamed West. It had seen men rise and fall, fortunes made and lost in the blink of an eye, and the unyielding struggle for survival etched onto the very soul of the land. It was a wind that knew the scent of blood and gunpowder, of desperation and last stands. Tonight it carried a new story, one that was just beginning to unfold within the 4 log walls of a solitary cabin where a woman who had sought refuge from the world found herself at the heart of a storm she could never have imagined. The man Ronan was a conundrum. He healed with a speed that was almost unnatural, his body knitting itself back together with a resilience that defied the severity of his wounds. He moved with a quiet grace, a predator's economy of motion that was both captivating and unsettling. He spoke little of his past, but the fragments he offered painted a picture of a life lived on the edge, a life of danger and purpose that was a world away from Maeve's quiet existence. He told her of the Shadow Wolf clan, a secretive society of warriors, drawn from various tribes bound not by blood, but by a shared code of honor and a sworn duty to protect the sacred places of their ancestors. They were the ghosts of the plains moving unseen, their existence a closely guarded secret. They were the keepers of the old ways, the guardians of a power that the encroaching world of the white man sought to extinguish. The artifact they stole, he explained one evening, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards of the cabin, is the heart of the mountain, a stone, an ordinary-looking piece of obsidian to most, but to my people it is the source of our strength, our connection to the spirit world. Without it we are diminished. Maeve listened, her skepticism warring with a growing sense of unease. She had heard tales of Indian magic, of shapeshifters and spirit walkers, but she had always dismissed them as a campfire fantasy. Yet there was a conviction in Ronan's voice, a raw sincerity in his golden eyes, that made her question her own certainties. As he regained his strength, a subtle shift occurred in their dynamic. The initial wariness between them began to thaw, replaced by a grudging respect. He taught her a Cheyenne lullaby, his deep voice filling the small cabin with a melody that was both haunting and beautiful. She in turn showed him how to set a new kind of trap, a deadfall of her own design, more ingenious and deadly than any he had ever seen. They were 2 solitary souls, 2 survivors from different worlds, finding an unexpected kinship in their shared isolation. But the specter of Silas and his gang loomed over them, a constant, unspoken threat. Maeve found herself watching the horizon with a new sense of dread, every dust devil, every distant rider sending a jolt of fear through her. She had built a life of quiet solitude, a fragile peace that she now realized was as brittle as glass. One afternoon, as she was tending to her small garden, a glint of metal in the distance caught her eye. It was the sun reflecting off a spyglass, and it was pointed directly at her cabin. Her blood ran cold. They were here. She scrambled back inside her heart, pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "They're here," she whispered, her voice tight with panic. Ronan was on his feet in an instant, his movements fluid and silent. He peered through a crack in the cabin wall, his golden eyes narrowed. "Just one," he said, his voice calm, a steadying presence in the face of her fear. "A scout." "What do we do?" Maeve asked, her hand instinctively going to her colt. Ronan looked at her, a faint smile touching his lips. "We let him come." The rider approached with a swaggering confidence, his horse kicking up a cloud of dust. He was a big, burly man with a greasy beard and a cruel sneer on his face. He dismounted his spurs, jingling, and sauntered towards the cabin, his hand resting casually on the butt of his pistol. "Howdy, ma'am," he called out, his voice dripping with false congeniality. "Just passing through, wondering if I might trouble you for a drink of water." Maeve opened the door a crack, her shotgun held at her side, hidden from his view. "I've got no water to spare for the likes of you," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The man's eyes narrowed. "That ain't very neighborly of you, ma'am." He took a step closer, his hand tightening on his pistol. "I ain't asking again." Suddenly a shadow fell over him. He looked up, his eyes widening in confusion and then in terror as Ronan dropped from the roof of the cabin, landing silently behind him. Before the man could even utter a cry, Ronan's arm snaked around his throat, a knife flashing in the sunlight. It was over in a matter of seconds. Maeve stared, her breath hitched in her throat, at the swift, brutal efficiency of Ronan's actions. This was not just a man defending himself. This was a warrior, a predator in his element. The chasm between their worlds had never felt so vast, so terrifyingly real. Ronan dragged the body behind the cabin, his face grim. "He won't be the last," he said, his voice low and urgent. "They'll send more when he doesn't return. We need to leave. Now." But Maeve stood her ground, her jaw set in a stubborn line. "This is my home," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance. "I'm not running." "Maeve," he said, his voice softer now, his golden eyes pleading with her. "You don't understand what you're up against. Silas is not just a common outlaw. He's a man who deals in death and fear. He has a small army at his command, men who are as ruthless and as bloodthirsty as he is." "And what about you?" She shot back, her fear giving way to a surge of anger. "What about your warrior clan? Where are they? Why aren't they here, helping you get back your precious stone?" A shadow passed over Ronan's face, a flicker of pain and something else. Shame. "I was cast out," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I disobeyed a direct order. I went after Silas alone, convinced I could retrieve the heart of the mountain and prove my worth. I was arrogant, and I paid the price." The revelation hung in the air between them, a stark and painful truth. He was not just a leader. He was a fallen leader, an exile. The warrior clan he spoke of was not coming to his rescue. They were alone. The full weight of their predicament settled upon Maeve, a suffocating blanket of despair. They were trapped two against a small army of ruthless killers. The isolation she had once cherished had become her prison, and the man she had saved her cellmate. The West, in its infinite cruelty, had once again cornered her, leaving her with no way out. Or so she thought. For in the heart of every survivor, there is a flicker of defiance, a refusal to be broken. And in that moment, Maeve made a choice. She would not run. She would fight. And if she was going to die, she would die on her own terms, with her Colt peacemaker in her hand and the taste of gunpowder on her lips. She looked at Ronan, a silent understanding passing between them. They were no longer just a woman and a man. They were allies, bound by a shared enemy and a desperate, flickering hope. The storm was upon them, and they would face it together. The scout's horse, a restless beast, was a stark reminder of the fragile truce they had brokered with fate. They couldn't let it wander back to Silas's camp, a silent messenger of their deadly secret. With a heavy heart, Maeve led the animal into the small corral she had built for her own mare. A silent prayer on her lips, that the animal's presence wouldn't betray them. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a breathtaking spectacle that was lost on Maeve. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden threat, every rustle of the wind a prelude to violence. The vast open plains that had once been a symbol of freedom now felt like a cage, a killing ground where they were the cornered prey. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with unspoken fears. Ronan was cleaning his knife, his movements precise and methodical, a stark contrast to the turmoil that Maeve felt churning within her. He had a warrior's stillness, an unnerving calm in the face of imminent danger. It was a calm that Maeve, despite her own resilience, found herself envying. "He was right, you know," she said, her voice barely a whisper, breaking the heavy silence. "The scout. It wasn't very neighborly of me." Ronan looked up, his golden eyes unreadable in the dim light of the cabin. "He wasn't a neighbor, Maeve. He was a wolf at your door, and you did what you had to do." "I've never killed a man before," she confessed, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Neither had I until I was forced to," he replied, his voice gentle. "The first time is always the hardest. But in this world, sometimes the only choice we have is to be the wolf or the lamb." He told her more about Silas, then painting a portrait of a man devoid of conscience, a man who had carved a path of terror across the frontier. Silas had once been a respected cavalry officer, but the horrors of the war had twisted him, turning him into a monster who reveled in cruelty and bloodshed. He had gathered a following of like-minded men, a motley crew of deserters, outlaws, and murderers who were drawn to his charismatic depravity like moths to a flame. "They are not just after the heart of the mountain," Ronan explained, his voice grim. "They are after the power it represents. Silas believes it holds the key to immortality, to a dominion over this land that will make him a king." "He's insane." Maeve breathed, a chill running down her spine. "He is," Ronan agreed. "But an insane man with a small army is a dangerous thing." As night fell, a new sound joined the symphony of the plains, the distant howl of a wolf. But this was no ordinary wolf. It was a mournful, haunting cry that seemed to echo the desolation in Maeve's own heart. Ronan's head snapped up, his eyes widening in a mixture of disbelief and dawning hope. He moved to the door, his body tense. "They've come," he whispered, his voice filled with a reverence that sent a shiver down Maeve's spine. "Who?" she asked, her hand reaching for her shotgun. "My clan," he replied, a note of awe in his voice. "The Shadow Wolves." He let out a cry, then a perfect imitation of the wolf's howl, a call that was answered by another, and then another, until the night was filled with their haunting chorus. Maeve watched her heart in her throat as figures began to emerge from the darkness, moving with a silent, ghostly grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. They were not the wild, savage warriors of her imagination. They were a disciplined, organized force, their faces painted with the symbols of their clan, their eyes glowing with an ethereal light in the darkness. They were armed with a mixture of traditional weapons, bows, arrows, tomahawks, and modern firearms, a deadly fusion of the old world and the new. They surrounded the cabin, their presence a silent, intimidating force. At their head was a tall, imposing figure with a face like a mask of carved stone. His eyes, as black as obsidian, were fixed on Ronan. "Kaelin," Ronan said, his voice a mixture of relief and trepidation. The warrior Kaelin dismounted, his movements fluid and powerful. He walked towards Ronan, his face a mask of cold fury. "You have broken your oath, Ronan," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You have brought shame upon our clan." "I did what I thought was right," Ronan replied, his voice firm, though Maeve could see the tremor in his hands. "Silas has the heart of the mountain. We cannot let him keep it." "You were forbidden to act alone." Kaelin retorted, his voice like the crack of a whip. "Your arrogance has endangered us all." He gestured to Maeve, his eyes filled with a mixture of suspicion and contempt. "And you have brought an outsider into our world. You have revealed our existence to one of them." Maeve stiffened, her hand tightening on her shotgun. But before she could speak, Ronan stepped in front of her, shielding her from Kaelin's accusing gaze. "She saved my life," he said, his voice ringing with a fierce protectiveness. "She is not our enemy." Kaelin sneered, a cruel twist of his lips. "She is a white woman. They are all our enemies. They have taken our land, slaughtered our people, and driven us into the shadows. She is no different." "You are wrong," Ronan insisted, his voice rising. "She is a survivor just like us. She understands the struggle for freedom, the fight for a place in this world. She is one of us in spirit, if not in blood." Kaelin let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "You have been with this woman for a few weeks, and already you have forgotten who you are. The spirits have clouded your judgment, Ronan. You are no longer one of us." With a swift, brutal movement, he struck Ronan across the face, sending him stumbling to the ground. "You are an exile," Kaelin declared, his voice echoing in the sudden, shocked silence. "You are no longer a shadow wolf. You are nothing." He turned to his warriors, his voice ringing with authority. "We will retrieve the heart of the mountain, but we will do it our way, without him." He turned his back on Ronan, a final dismissive gesture. But as he did, his eyes met Maeve's. And in that brief, intense gaze, Maeve saw something that surprised her. It was not just hatred and contempt. It was fear. Kaelin, for all his bluster and bravado, was afraid of her. He was afraid of the unknown, of the woman who had defied his expectations, the woman who had saved the life of the man he had just cast out. In that moment, Maeve realized that she was not just a witness, not just a pawn in a larger game. She was a wild card, an unpredictable element in a conflict that was far more complex and dangerous than she had ever imagined. The lines had been drawn, the stakes had been raised, and she was no longer on the sidelines. She was in the heart of the storm, and she would have to choose a side. Kaelin's words hung in the cold night air, a sentence of banishment that was as sharp and as final as the blade of a tomahawk. Ronan, his face a mask of bruised pride and shattered hope, remained on the ground, the dust of his homeland a bitter taste in his mouth. The shadow wolves, his brothers in arms, his family now stood as his jailers, their faces grim and unyielding. Maeve's heart, a hardened, calloused thing, broke for him. She had seen that look before in the eyes of men who had lost everything, men who had been stripped of their identity, their purpose, their very reason for being. She had seen it in the mirror. She took a step forward, her shotgun still clutched in her hand, a silent challenge to the wall of warriors before her. "He may be an exile to you," she said, her voice ringing with a conviction that surprised even herself. "But he is not nothing. He is a man of honor, a man who was willing to sacrifice everything for his people. That is more than I can say for you, Kaelin. You who would leave your own brother to face a common enemy alone." A murmur of unease rippled through the ranks of the shadow wolves. Maeve's words, spoken with a raw, unvarnished truth, had struck a chord. They were warriors bound by a code of honor, and the abandonment of a brother, even a disgraced one, did not sit well with them. Kaelin's face, a mask of cold fury, tightened. He took a step towards her, his hand reaching for the tomahawk at his belt. "You speak of things you do not understand, woman." He hissed, his voice a low, dangerous threat. But before he could take another step, a new voice, old and weathered as the ancient mountains, cut through the tension. "She speaks with the wisdom of the spirits, Kaelin." An old woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes as bright and as sharp as a hawk's, emerged from the shadows. She was Lyra, the clan's shaman, a woman whose counsel was sought by all, even the proud and arrogant Kaelin. She walked to Maeve, her eyes filled with an ancient wisdom, studying the white woman with an intensity that seemed to pierce through her very soul. "The spirits have shown me," Lyra said, her voice a low, mesmerizing chant. "They have shown me a storm, a great darkness that threatens to consume us all. They have shown me a she-wolf, a protector, a woman with a fire in her heart that rivals the sun." She turned to Kaelin, her eyes flashing with a power that made even him flinch. "You see only the color of her skin, Kaelin. You are blinded by the prejudices of the past. But the spirits see her heart, and it is the heart of a warrior." She then turned to Ronan, a gentle smile touching her lips. "You did not break your oath, my son," she said, her voice filled with a mother's love. "You followed the path that the spirits laid out for you, a path that has led us to her." She looked at Maeve, her eyes twinkling. "The heart of the mountain is not just a stone, child. It is a key that can unlock a power that has been dormant for centuries, a power that Silas, in his ignorance, seeks to control. But it is a power that can only be wielded by those with a pure heart, a heart that is free from the taint of greed and hatred." Lyra's words, spoken with the authority of a prophet, had a profound effect on the assembled warriors. They looked at Maeve with new eyes, their suspicion replaced by a dawning respect. They looked at Ronan, not as an exile, but as a man who had been guided by a higher purpose. But Kaelin was not so easily swayed. His pride, a stubborn, unyielding thing, would not allow him to admit his error. "She is still an outsider," he insisted, his voice laced with a bitter resentment. "She cannot be trusted." "Then let her prove her worth," Lyra replied, her voice a challenge. "Let her face the trial of the spirits. Let her walk the path of the warrior and prove that she is worthy of our trust." A hushed silence fell over the group. The trial of the spirits was a dangerous, often deadly ritual, a test of courage, strength, and spiritual fortitude that few had ever survived. To subject an outsider, a white woman, to such a trial was unheard of. But Maeve, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and a strange, exhilarating sense of purpose, did not hesitate. "I accept," she said, her voice clear and strong. Ronan looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Maeve, you don't know what you're agreeing to," he whispered, his voice urgent. "I know that I'm not going to stand by and watch my home be destroyed, my life be torn apart," she replied, her voice filled with a fierce determination. "I know that I'm not going to let a man like Sluss win. And if this is the only way to earn your trust to fight alongside you, then it's a risk I'm willing to take." And so, as the first rays of dawn painted the eastern sky, Maeve, the solitary woman of the plains, found herself on a path she had never chosen, a path that would lead her into the heart of a mystical world she had never known existed. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a warrior, a she-wolf, a woman on the verge of discovering a strength she never knew she possessed. The trial awaited a crucible that would either forge her into a legend or consume her in its flames. But one thing was certain: the West would never be the same. And neither would she. The trial of the spirits was not a single event, but a journey, a spiritual odyssey that would test the limits of Maeve's endurance, both physical and mental. It was a path that wound through the treacherous, sun-scorched landscapes of the Badlands, a place where the earth itself seemed to be twisted into grotesque shapes, a testament to the raw, untamed power of nature. Lyra, the ancient shaman, was her guide, her mentor, her tormentor. She pushed Maeve to the brink of exhaustion, forcing her to confront her deepest fears, her most painful memories. She made her fast for days, her body racked with hunger and thirst, her mind teetering on the edge of delirium. She made her climb sheer rock faces with her bare hands, her muscles screaming in protest, her spirit threatening to break. During her fast-induced visions, Maeve was forced to relive the darkest moments of her past. The fire that had claimed her family, the betrayal of the man she had once loved, the years of lonely, bitter solitude. But Lyra was there, a steady presence in the swirling chaos of her memories, guiding her through the pain, helping her to find the strength to forgive, to let go, to heal. She learned the ways of the Shadow Wolves, their ancient traditions, their deep connection to the spirit world. She learned to read the signs of the earth, to listen to the whispers of the wind, to understand the language of the animals. She learned to fight with a tomahawk, her movements becoming as fluid and as deadly as any of the clan's warriors. Ronan, though forbidden to interfere, was a constant, silent presence on the periphery of her trial. He watched her from a distance, his heart aching with a mixture of pride and fear. He saw the transformation in her, the emergence of a strength and a resilience that he had only glimpsed before. He saw the she-wolf that Lyra had spoken of, a creature of fierce beauty and untamed spirit, and he found himself falling in love with her. The final trial took place in a sacred cave, a place where the veil between the physical and the spiritual world was at its thinnest. It was a place of power, a place where the spirits of the ancestors dwelled. "You must enter the cave alone," Lyra said, her voice grave. "You must face the spirits of this place and prove to them that you are worthy. If you are, they will grant you a vision, a glimpse into the future. If you are not, they will claim you as their own." Maeve, her body lean and hard from her ordeal, her eyes burning with a newfound intensity, entered the cave without hesitation. The darkness was absolute, a suffocating blanket that seemed to press in on her from all sides. The air was cold and still heavy, with the scent of damp earth and something else, something ancient and powerful. She walked for what all seemed like an eternity, her only guide the rough, uneven floor beneath her bare feet. And then she saw it, a faint ethereal glow in the distance. As she drew closer, the glow intensified, coalescing into the shape of a wolf, its eyes burning with a cold blue fire. It was the spirit of the Shadow Wolf, the totem of the clan. It circled her, its movements silent and graceful, its eyes filled with an ancient wisdom, seeming to pierce through her very soul. It was not a menacing presence, but it was not a friendly one either. It was a judge, a gatekeeper, a being of immense power that demanded respect. Maeve, her heart pounding in her chest, stood her ground, her gaze locked with the spirit wolf's. She did not flinch, she did not show fear. She opened her heart to the spirit laying bare her soul, her pain, her hopes, her dreams. And then the wolf spoke its voice, not a sound, but a thought, a feeling, a wave of pure emotion that washed over her. "You are not one of us." It said, its voice a mixture of sadness and regret. "But you have the heart of a warrior. You have the spirit of a survivor. You have earned our respect." The wolf then touched its nose to her forehead, and a jolt of energy like lightning shot through her. The cave disappeared, replaced by a swirling vortex of images, of sounds, of emotions. She saw Silas and his men, their faces twisted with greed and hatred as they performed a dark ritual, attempting to unlock the power of the heart of the mountain. She saw a great battle, a clash of steel and fire, of arrows and bullets. She saw death and destruction, but she also saw hope. She saw a small band of warriors, a fusion of the old world and the new fighting side by side, their faces a mixture of desperation and defiance. And at their head, she saw herself, her face painted with the symbol of the she-wolf, her eyes burning with a righteous fire. The vision faded, and she found herself back in the cave, the spirit wolf gone. She was alone, but she was not the same woman who had entered. She had been tested. She had been forged in the crucible of the spirits, and she had emerged stronger, more powerful, more certain of her purpose than ever before. She walked out of the cave and into the sunlight, her head held high. The shadow wolves who had been waiting for her, their faces a mixture of anticipation and apprehension, fell silent as she approached. Lyra smiled a knowing look in her eyes. "The spirits have spoken," she said, her voice filled with a quiet pride. "You are one of us now, Maeve of the She-Wolf clan. You are our sister, our warrior, our hope." Kalen, his face a mask of grudging respect, stepped forward and offered her a tomahawk, its handle wrapped in a sheath of intricately beaded leather. It was a gesture of acceptance, of reconciliation, of brotherhood. Maeve took the tomahawk, its weight familiar in her hand. She looked at Ronan, a silent understanding passing between them. The lines had been blurred, the boundaries had been broken. They were no longer two separate worlds, but one united by a common enemy, a shared purpose, a desperate, flickering hope. The final battle was at hand, and they would face it together. A new clan, a new family, a new breed of warrior in the heart of the untamed West. The vision Maeve had experienced in the sacred cave was a chilling premonition of what was to come. Silas, driven by his lust for power, was not just trying to unlock the heart of the mountain. He was attempting to pervert its sacred energy, to twist it into a weapon of unimaginable destruction. The ritual he was performing, a dark mockery of the Cheyenne's sacred ceremonies, threatened to unleash a plague of darkness upon the land, a shadow that would consume everything in its path. Time was running out. They had to act, and they had to act fast. The shadow wolves, now united under a common banner, began to prepare for war. They were a small force, a mere handful of warriors against Silas's small army, but they were a force to be reckoned with. They were the ghosts of the plains masters of stealth and guerrilla warfare, their knowledge of the land, their greatest weapon. Maeve, now a fully fledged member of the clan, was an integral part of their war council. Her knowledge of the white man's ways, of their tactics, their weapons, their weaknesses, was invaluable. She and Ronan, their bond forged in the crucible of shared adversity, worked side by side, their strengths complementing each other perfectly. He was the strategist, the visionary, the leader who inspired his people with his courage and his unwavering faith. She was the pragmatist, the tactician, the warrior whose grit and resourcefulness had earned her the respect of even the most hardened of the clan's warriors. Their plan was audacious, a desperate gamble that hinged on the element of surprise. They would not engage Silas's army in a pitched battle, a suicidal confrontation that they could not possibly win. Instead, they would use their knowledge of the land to their advantage, to lure Silas and his men into a trap, a killing ground of their own choosing. Their chosen battlefield was a narrow canyon, a place of treacherous, shifting rock and hidden crevices, a place known to the Cheyenne as the Canyon of the Sleeping Spirits. It was a place that was both sacred and feared, a place where the spirits of the dead were said to wander, their mournful cries echoing in the wind. The trap was set. The shadow wolves, their faces painted for war, their hearts filled with a cold, righteous fury, melted into the landscape, becoming one with the rocks and the shadows. Maeve, her face painted with the symbol of the she-wolf, her colt peacemaker, and her tomahawk at her side, took her position on a high ledge overlooking the canyon floor, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of Silas's approach. They didn't have to wait long. As the sun reached its zenith, a cloud of dust appeared in the distance, a harbinger of the approaching storm. Silas and his men rode into the canyon with a swaggering arrogance, their laughter echoing off the canyon walls, a stark violation of the sacred silence of the place. They were a motley crew of cutthroats and killers, their faces a gallery of depravity, their eyes burning with the fever of greed and bloodlust. At their head rode Silas, a charismatic figure of pure evil, his face a handsome mask that concealed the rot within his soul. He held the heart of the mountain aloft, the obsidian stone pulsing with a sickly purple light, a testament to the dark ritual he had performed. He rode into the center of the canyon, a triumphant sneer on his face, and raised the heart of the mountain above his head. "The power is mine," he roared, his voice echoing through the canyon. "I am the king of this land. I am immortal." And then all hell broke loose. A single arrow fired from an unseen bow struck the heart of the mountain, shattering the obsidian stone into 1,000 pieces. The purple light exploded a wave of dark energy that sent Silas and his men reeling. And then the shadow wolves attacked. They rose from the rocks, and the shadows a silent, deadly force, their war cries a chorus of righteous fury. Arrows rained down from the canyon walls, finding their mark with deadly accuracy. Warriors descended from the cliffs, their tomahawks and knives flashing in the sunlight. It was a maelstrom of violence, a whirlwind of death and destruction. The canyon floor became a charnel house, a chaotic ballet of blood and steel. Silas's men, caught completely by surprise, were thrown into a panic, their arrogance replaced by a primal fear. Maeve, from her vantage point on the ledge, was a whirlwind of deadly grace. Her colt peacemaker barked its bullets, finding their mark with unerring accuracy. Her tomahawk, a blur of motion, was a deadly extension of her will. She fought with the ferocity of a cornered she-wolf, her every move a testament to the warrior she had become. She saw Ronan, a blur of motion in the heart of the battle, his twin tomahawks a whirlwind of death. He fought with the righteous fury of a man who was fighting for his people, for his land, for his very soul. And then she saw Silas. He had recovered from the initial shock of the attack and was now fighting with the desperation of a cornered rat. He was a skilled fighter, his cavalry saber a blur of motion, but he was no match for the righteous fury of the shadow wolves. Maeve knew what she had to do. She had to end this. She had to face the man who had brought so much death and destruction to her world. With a final desperate leap, she launched herself from the ledge, landing on the canyon floor with a jarring thud. She ran through the chaos of the battle, her eyes fixed on Silas, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and a cold, hard resolve. She reached him just as he was about to strike down a young warrior. With a fierce cry, she threw her tomahawk, the weapon, spinning through the air and embedding itself in Silas's shoulder. He roared in pain, his saber falling from his grasp. He turned to her, his eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and disbelief locking with hers. "You," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "The woman from the cabin. I should have killed you when I had the chance. You should have—" Maeve replied, her voice cold and steady as she drew her Colt peacemaker. "But you didn't. And now it's too late." She fired, the sound of the gunshot echoing through the canyon, a final definitive punctuation mark to the symphony of violence. Silas's eyes widened in surprise, a look of stunned disbelief on his face before he crumpled to the ground, his reign of terror finally at an end. A sudden, shocked silence fell over the canyon, the echoes of the gunshot slowly fading into the wind. The battle was over. The Shadow Wolves had won. They had paid a heavy price. Many of their warriors lay dead or wounded, their blood staining the sacred ground of the canyon. But they had won. They had reclaimed their land. They had restored the balance. They had honored their ancestors. Maeve stood over Silas's body, the smoke from her Colt peacemaker curling in the air, a silent testament to her victory. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a warrior, a hero, a legend. She was Maeve of the She-Wolf clan, the woman who had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, her spirit as untamed and as indomitable as the land she now called home. The West had tested her, it had tried to break her, but in the end it had only made her stronger. And as she looked at Ronan, at her newfound family, at the vast open plains that stretched out before her, she knew that she had finally found her place, her purpose, her home. And so the legend of the She-Wolf of the Plains was born, a story whispered around campfires and told in hushed tones in dusty saloons, a tale of a woman who found her strength not in solitude, but in kinship, not in hiding from the world, but in fighting for it. The West is full of stories of lone wolves, but this is a tale of how one woman's courage forged a new pack, stronger and more resilient than any that had come before. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the wild heart of the West. If you were captivated by Maeve's story and the saga of the Shadow Wolf clan, don't let the adventure end here. Please hit that like button. Share this story with fellow adventurers, and be sure to subscribe for more original Western tales that bring the frontier to life. Your support helps us keep the campfire burning.